Now, we already know this video is gonna piss a lot of people off. If you're living in Portugal and you love it, this video isn't for you. You might agree with what we have to say here, but you've adapted and Portugal feels like home. If you're here and you regret it, or you haven't moved yet and you're unsure, listen carefully, because here are the reasons Portugal isn't for everyone.
We've heard this story before. Example, man watches a video, convinces his wife that Portugal is the place to be. They do some research on Google, maybe watch some cool YouTube videos of foreigners who are singing the praises of Portugal. And then they decide to move. But then they arrive, and many of the reasons that Portugal is bad for them starts to rear its ugly head.
The first one that I think we should talk about is bureaucracy. Bureaucracy in Portugal is an absolute nightmare. Now, if you're an American and you've moved here, US has its own problems with bureaucracy. However, most of us don't have to deal with it because we are citizens, we were born there. There are things like in the immigration process that people that have immigrated to the US have to deal with that we're completely oblivious to. But this is a reality of moving to a new country, and Portugal is no different. Portugal is actually pretty bad.
Really difficult. I think also too, when you're born in a place and you grew up there and you live your whole life, you just understand the legal system. You understand how the bureaucracy works. But then as an adult, you move somewhere, a different country, and everything's so new. It's so unfamiliar. So you just don't understand how it works, and it can get quite frustrating when you're trying to navigate certain things and it's not working out for you, right? And then it's stressful. So it goes from it being uncomfortable and unfamiliar to stressful.
So one of the things that might hit families, especially families with kids, is if you want to homeschool your kids, there's some hoops that you have to jump through to legally do that.
Yeah, it's a bit of a gray area here.
Another thing with bureaucracy is just the amount of hoops that you have to jump through to get things done, and the fact that you might have to do the same thing 3 times to actually accomplish the thing that you've set out to do. Now, there might be bureaucratic inefficiencies, let's say, in things that you do in the US. For example, going to the DMV. The DMV can be an absolute mess, and in the past it certainly was. These days, with technology, things have improved a bit, but it does feel like IMT, for example, or EMT, with Portugal, which is like the equivalent to the DMV, is still behind times.
So we're not saying that bureaucracy is great everywhere else and Portugal is just so terrible, but kind of the things that we want to touch on is that they are a little behind in some things, but then also it just being so foreign and so new that you don't know where to start to even navigate it.
If you're someone that cannot handle these types of tricky bureaucratic shifts or bureaucratic clunkiness, Portugal is not for you.
And on top of that, there have been a lot of government changes that have been really fast. So you have the bureaucracy that could be stressful, but then you have all these governmental changes that are affecting foreigners and people maybe buying properties and coming in. So you have these government changes that can make it feel a little unstable and unsettling as well.
A lot of times in your home country, you kind of have buy-in to the political scene because you were raised in it, you've maybe been practicing voting, and then you move to a new country like Portugal and you don't automatically have voting rights, you don't understand the political system or the political climate you're moving into, and then there are changes that happen in the government. All of this stuff can kind of change the feel and the environment of being in a foreign place. And Portugal has absolutely experienced that over the past 3 years.
And it's also affecting those who aren't here just yet, but who are in the process of coming. So maybe you've been researching for a year or two and you're like, okay, I definitely need this visa. And then boom, that changes. And you're like, wait, so what visa do I need now? How does that change? What do I need to prove on my application? So it affects people who are interested in the country coming in, but then once you're here as well, it's also affecting us.
Yeah, maybe you have active income and you're making, 2,000 euros a month, which would be enough to live here in Portugal, I think fairly easily, but you won't have the opportunity because the visa has changed.
Right. So you have those things, you have things like taxes and NHR, that stuff has rapidly changed as well, which has affected some of you to where you're like, I can't even move here now because of this.
Let's talk about money. Let's talk about money with taxes. Now, for most people that I know, they don't like paying taxes. And if you're like that and you don't like paying high taxes, don't move here. Mm-hmm. NHR is ending, which is a tax regime or a tax scheme that gave favorable tax incentives to new residents of Portugal. So it could be for Portuguese people moving back to Portugal, or it could be for foreigners moving into Portugal. The favorable tax regime could mean 0, 10, 20%, depending on what the income is. For most Americans, let's say, moving with their jobs on a kind of a medium income in the States, you're probably hitting the highest tax bracket in Portugal. So
Right.
we're talking like 40+% in taxes. So you have your wages, 40% goes to taxes, you keep 60%. Fun, right?
Yeah, it's a big hit. And obviously, you can say, well, there are benefits to it, which there are. But obviously, the massive con is that it's just money out of your pocket. So you really need to consider your financial situation before moving here or setting it up correctly before you move here so that you can mitigate some of these issues, whether your NHR will end in 10 years or you won't even get NHR, but just your tax situation overall. It's something that you really have to think about.
So if you don't like taxes and you don't like paying taxes,
Maybe it's not for you.
you might be Portuguese,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's probably not for you. There are other places in Europe that would be lower taxes, you keep more of your earnings, and yeah, Portugal's not the place for you.
Another thing that a lot of people I think don't really consider is when you do move to a different country, you're leaving your friends and family behind. So whether that's elderly parents or your kids or just close friends that you've known your whole life, you're moving to a whole different country. And of course, technology has been really good with keeping us connected, but that's assuming that both parties are actually staying connected because it takes two there. So that could be difficult to be so far away from your familiar community and your comfort zone in that sense.
Yeah, and I think there's actually a couple of things at play here with that point. As time goes on, let's say that you're in your 40s, maybe 50s, and as time goes on, as your parents get older, health problems could arise which draw you back to being closer to them. That has to be a consideration. Like, are you in a position where you have someone else in your family that can take care of an elderly parent? You need to consider this type of stuff. And the same goes on the other side with having kids. You're going to have grandbabies, right? Hopefully. And if you're the type of person that really needs to have that close connection, like on a daily basis or weekly basis with your grandchildren, Portugal's not the place.
Yeah, that's really hard because there's only so much a screen can do to really feel connected.
Now, maybe Portugal could be a temporary place and you spend a year here, 2 years here, but it would not be a long-term solution.
So then also thinking about once you move, you're leaving your creature comforts. So things that you know, maybe you've known them your whole life or you just something that's kind of newer that you can't find in a new place, you're leaving that stuff behind. So you have to be okay to open up and either be done with it because you can't even find it here or be okay with looking for alternatives, which can be time consuming and stressful, but
Or expensive.
or expensive as well. So you have to just keep in mind that you will be leaving stuff behind that you can't get here.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think this is the one that has so much variety and nuance to it. And sometimes you won't even know what your creature comforts are until they're not there anymore. So, for example, there are a lot of people who don't consider the type of heating and cooling they have in their home. And then they arrive in Portugal and find that a lot of rentals and buildings in general that are older and available to move into don't have central heat and air. And central heat and air among a lot of Americans is quite a common thing. Yes, there are some people in the States that have mini splits to heat and cool their spaces, but a lot of people have central heat and air, and a lot of people have good insulation. So these are things that can be seriously lacking here in Portugal and really be a drag on life.
Yes, another thing that I think that people don't consider is grocery shopping. So I think you become familiar with the certain like names of the grocery stores and the layout and what you
Products.
like and the products in there. So then you move to Portugal, a whole different place, and then of course you learn the names of the stores. Okay, not bad. You see where the closest store is to you. Okay, but then you walk up and down the aisles trying to figure out where is this? Like in my, at home or where I used to live, it would be here, but it might not be in that section here. So just trying to learn that stuff again, it's this settling in process that can be a bit shocking. So grocery shopping can be something that you would think, oh, it's so easy, and of course I need food, but then you find that it stresses you out a little bit.
Yeah, I think a big one these days, and this is totally a first world problem, is Amazon Prime. Now, we've been living abroad long enough, 15 years basically, where Amazon Prime never really became like a part of our life the way it has for some other people that we know. Maybe that's you. If you're an Amazon Primer, don't expect to have like an order delivered here same day or next day.
Not from the US.
It just doesn't happen. Like, I hear of people using Amazon Prime where, like, or Instacart, whatever it is, it's like one click, you know, their payment system's already uploaded, boom, they get their item, and it's like exactly the thing they wanted.
In the US.
In the US, yeah, and everything's great. But here it's like it might need to come from Spain or it might need to come from Germany, and it'll take time. It'll arrive, but it's not as like that instant gratification that you're probably used to.
Yes, it's definitely not as easy, that's for sure.
Food is one that we're probably going to see things thrown at the computer screen. Portugal was just ranked in the top 5 in terms of international foods or cuisines for 2023, right? Or is it 2024? I can't remember how the article put it, but it caused a big stir online. There were people coming out screaming, "Yay, Portugal!" and other people that were like, "What? Like, I can't even name a Portuguese dish." I get it. I totally understand what people mean. I think that if you come here and Portuguese food isn't for you, and you are living in a smaller place, good luck.
Yeah, that's going to be really hard because you just don't find as much variety if you're not in the cities. I think it's okay if you don't like Portuguese food, but you're going to have to adapt a little bit and at least try to find a couple dishes that you like, because that's going to be the most on offer.
Or you're going to be cooking at home a lot. So if you're the type of person that likes to go out and you like international cuisine, but you also like to live in a small town, Portugal's not going to work.
No.
It's just not going to work.
No. And then also if you have any sort of food allergies or sensitivities, Portugal is slowly catching up to that, slowly catching up to the vegetarian, vegan, gluten-free, dairy issues, that stuff.
It's doing a good job.
Yes.
It's just not there yet.
It's just not there. In the cities, it's doing okay. But again, if you're wanting to come and not live in a city and live in a smaller place, you will struggle with that type of food stuff.
For sure.
And then also, if you want to live in a smaller place, language is going to be difficult. So while Portuguese do have a high proficiency of English, smaller towns maybe a little less so. It might be an older population. They're just not used to having to speak English there. So you will maybe find it a little more stressful being out in a smaller area and trying to fumble through the language as you learn Portuguese, of course.
Yeah, but I would say if you're not someone that wants to learn a new language, you need to consider moving to another country that speaks English, because it's good and right to want to learn the language of the country that you're in, especially if you're considering being somewhere long term. We understand that if you're moving for a job and you're only going to be there, a year or 6 months on relocation, those situations are a little different. But if you're looking to be somewhere long term, then it's highly advisable to learn the local language, despite the fact, like Kalie said, that Portuguese people are fantastic at speaking English over the whole. You have great fluency in places like Lisbon and Porto, but
Algarve too.
Algarve as well. But then once you get outside of that, it can drop off and it can be frustrating. So if you're the type of person that gets nervous or anxious about having to make a fool of yourself, because honestly, that's what language learning is like. It's like you're having to fail a lot because that is where learning takes place. I don't know if I would recommend moving to a place that doesn't speak English. In Portugal, it's Portuguese.
The overall stress that you need to consider is, are you going to be okay with feeling like a foreigner and being unfamiliar with things? Because especially if you're not fluent in the language, you'll automatically feel a little stressed by the fact that it's not your comfort zone. So are you able to do that? Is that something that's going to be too stressful on you, take too much out of you, or is it something that you just need time to adapt and you just need to give it that time? So it's really important to think about, am I okay with plopping myself in a very unfamiliar situation? Because if you are, then okay, Portugal. But if you're not, then it's time to reconsider Portugal.
That's right. And we have been here 3 years and we have seen a ton of changes. And we want you to know what those changes are. So check out this video right here to check out the changes that have happened here in Portugal. And if we missed any of the reasons why Portugal shouldn't be for someone, leave us a comment in the comment section. Now let's get moving.
Bye.
Bye.